In August 1914, all the great European powers had already declared war. Germany had already foreseen the situation of a war on two fronts, with the French and the British on one side, and the Russians on the other. That is why Germany designed the Schlieffen Plan, whose objective was to attack France quickly first, and then focus on Russia. British and French, who were aware of this plan, rushed to gather their troops to face the German army, whose plan was to cross Belgium to get directly to Paris. The German advance is stopped by the British and French in the Marne River, a few kilometers away from Paris. In spite of this, the Germans will expand their area of control in the proximity of the English Channel. On the Eastern Front, Russia will begin its offensive against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which they consider the weakest rival. The Russian strategy is to go directly to Berlin to make the German surrender, but their advance is halted by the defeat at Tannenberg, which avoids the Russian invasion of Germany. However, it will not be a total failure for Russia, because it will achieve an important victory against the Austro-Hungarian Empire by taking control of Galicia. Faced with this situation, both sides will seek allies. The Central Empires will convince Turkey, a traditional enemy of Russia in the Black Sea, to join their alliance.
The Triple Entente, in turn, buys the participation of Italy into the war, promising territories of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in exchange. Its main objective was to march on Vienna, its result, a failure and the opening of a new front, the Alpine Front. The summer of 1915 was a disaster for the Russian army. A coordinated offensive by Germans and Austro-Hungarians forced them to retreat, losing an important territory. At the same time, Bulgaria takes advantage of the Austrian offensive on Serbia, from whom it claimed several territories, to enter the war. With Russia still on the mend, the Austrian and Bulgarian offensive is a ride over Serbian Montenegro and Albania.
These victories on the Eastern Front encouraged the German High Command to plan what would be the definitive offensive on the British and French. The target was to break their line of trenches by showing all their military might on Verdun. However, the French will hold out for 4 months, long enough for France and Britain to prepare a counteroffensive on the Somme River. The objective was to release German pressure on Verdun. The two battles lasted for months. Both were massacres with hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides, and none of them achieved significant advances. Meanwhile, Russia will take advantage of this situation, launching General Brusilov's offensive, which will manage to regain some lost territory. In this situation, Romania tries to invade Austria. However, the rapid Austro-Hungarian offensive drives back the Romanians, who lose almost half of their territory.
1917 is the crucial year, not so much because Greece will join the Triple Entente or because of the crushing Italian defeat at Caporetto, but because of two more decisive events. Firstly, the incorporation of the US into the war, probably for economic reasons, since it had loaned huge sums of money and supplies to France, Britain and Russia. If they lost the war, the US would not get back the borrowed money. Thus, the limited human and industrial resources of the United States sided with the Entente. Secondly, Lenin's decision to withdraw Russia due to the victory of the Russian Revolution in November. By signing the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, the new Bolshevik Russia had no choice but to hand over a huge amount of territory and almost a third of its population to the Central Powers.
By 1918, Germany had already emerged victorious from the Eastern Front. It ended the war on both fronts and was finally able to focus all its military force on the Western Front. However, they were forced to keep more than 1 million soldiers in the Eastern Zone to keep under control the recently conquered territories. So, the 1918 spring offensive on the French and the British, before the American troops arrived, did not have the expected force, and the final victory was not achieved. Finally, in the summer of 1918, when the American troops were finally ready, the Great Offensive was launched against the Central Powers. The unstoppable Allied advance caused a domino effect in the Central Powers, and their total collapse. The Austro-Hungarian Emperor and the German Emperor abdicated, the German Republic was proclaimed, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire progressively disintegrated into independent states. The war was over. But the peace negotiations will seem to be as hard as the war.